Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain I Am Vengeance. This movie tells a story of a former Special Forces personnel who tries to take revenge on those who have murdered his best friend viciously. Can he avenge his best friend, who he considers his own family? Let's find out in I Am Vengeance. I Am Vengeance begins by showing a man named Daniel Mason, who is being chased by several men in the forest. Daniel is a former Special Forces personnel in a military unit undergoing his retirement period. When Daniel's position is cornered, a drug cartel boss, Hatcher, gives Daniel a chance to fight back before they arrest and torture him with excruciating pain. However, Daniel, exhausted due to the previous chase, could not defeat him in a one-on-one battle, considering that Hatcher has extraordinary fighting abilities. After Daniel was captured, Hatcher and two of his men took him to a place like an empty bunker. He was tied to a chair, stripped naked, and interrogated while being beaten repeatedly by Hatcher. During the interrogation, it was discovered that Hatcher had worked as a Special Forces personnel with Daniel's father, and after he retired, he chose to work as a drug cartel dealer in the city. But because Daniel had betrayed him, Hatcher felt very angry and decided to kill Daniel and his family. He then said that he had killed both of Daniel's parents before he interrogated Daniel. Hearing this, Daniel felt very sad and angry, but he could not do anything to vent his anger in his bound and injured condition. Hatcher then asked Daniel who he worked for, but he remained silent and said nothing. Hatcher, who feels frustrated, decides to immediately execute and kill him. Meanwhile, in another place, there is a man named John Gold, a former Special Forces personnel who is currently retired and is a friend of Daniel's. John has known Daniel since they were very young, and their relationship has grown closer ever since. John even considered Daniel his own friend and considered Daniel's parents as his own parents. That morning, John got a voicemail from Daniel's father before being killed. Daniel's father said that he needed John's help as soon as possible. Hearing this, John immediately rushed to get ready and went to Daniel's house in the city of Devotion. But when John arrived at Daniel's house, he found that the house was in a very messy state and full of blood spots everywhere. Seeing these conditions, he could conclude that there had been shootings and murders in the house. John then contacted his former commander in the Special Forces to seek information about what had happened to Daniel's family. After that, he went to the hospital to ask the forensic doctor about Daniel's cause of death. The doctor said that Daniel died from various wounds on his body caused by a heavy blow and a gun stabbed to the back of his neck. Daniel's body was found by a Special Forces team who accidentally passed through a forest to return to the military barracks. The following day, John came to Daniel's parents' grave to pay their respects. On the grave of Daniel's parents, he promises that he will find the culprit who killed Daniel and his parents. During a visit to the tomb, John realized that a mysterious man was secretly watching him from a distance. In the evening, John goes to a nightclub in the town where Daniel lives. After entering the bar, John asked some of the people there if any of them knew Daniel Mason. Several men there who were Hatcher's men immediately informed Hatcher that a man was looking for him. Meanwhile, John was kicked out by the bar owner because he was afraid of a commotion in that place. But before John left, a woman named Rose said that she knew Daniel's family a little because they often came to her cafe. She then asked John to come to her cafe if he wanted to ask something about Daniel. When John was outside the nightclub, Hatcher's men named Lambert and Marshall approached him. They threatened him to leave this town immediately if he didn't want anything bad to happen to him. But John was not daunted by the threat and instead deliberately provoked the anger of Lambert and Marshall by throwing a cigarette butt. It almost created a scene and sparked a fight, but the Hatchers chose to leave and confront him later. Shortly after, a girl named Sandra approached John and said that she and her boyfriend knew Daniel. She then said that she would help him to find Daniel. After that, Sandra took John to her boyfriend's house named Keith. After arriving at Keith's house, John immediately interrogated Keith without further ado, but he doesn't have much information about Daniel's death. Keith then said that he knew Daniel because he used to be a drug cartel businessman in the city with him. However, in recent months, a group of drug cartels took over his territory and business, so Keith is currently unemployed. He then explains that the cartel is fully armed and led by a Hatcher. Hearing this, John invited Sandra to take him to a place that once had been Keith's business. Sandra pretends to be buying things for the Hatcher gang to let her in. Before she entered, John had secretly installed a bug in Sandra's shirt's back. In the room, Lambert gave Sandra a cell phone and asked her to tell him where John would be staying tonight while offering her a heroin package. Sandra, tempted by Lambert's offer, finally told Lambert the information. Fortunately, all the conversations between Sandra and Lambert were already known to John through the telephone connected to the pre-installed voice tapping device. After Sandra left the building, she said that Hatcher's drug cartel was very dangerous because the police station was very far from the location. So she advises John not to get involved with the Hatcher gang if he doesn't want to get into trouble. Hearing this, John did not respond and immediately asked her to leave. That night, Sandra took John to an empty shophouse to rest. On the way back to her house, Sandra took the drugs she had just got until she fell fast asleep. A few hours later, Sandra's cell phone rings and wakes her up. It turned out that the call came from Lambert, who asked where John was. Frightened and panicked, Sandra immediately told him that John was currently staying at an empty blue shophouse on the edge of town. Sandra does not realize that all her conversations have been intercepted by John. Knowing that the Hatcher gang would soon come to his place, John immediately prepared various weapons and traps to deal with them. The following day, Hatcher's men surrounded John's whereabouts, but they did not think that John had set up a trap that could kill them all. From the trap, one of Hatcher's men survived, but John managed to beat the man easily after hitting him several times. After knowing that all the men who had been sent earlier had now died, Hatcher became wary of John. Hatcher, who realized that John was not a random person who could be removed easily, immediately asked his subordinate named Lucy to find out John's background. Meanwhile, John comes to Rose's cafe to ask Rose for information about Daniel. He said that the city had changed a lot compared to 5 years ago when he was still living in the city. Currently, this city is filled with many mafias and very dangerous drug cartels, so John advises Rose to move out of the city immediately. She then explained that she couldn't leave the city because this cafe was the only place her parents left, and she had to support herself and her sister. John then asked Rose how she knew Daniel. She then replied that she had known Daniel because he had been a regular customer at her cafe. After that, John returned to Hatcher's business location with Sandra. When Lambert opened the door for Sandra, John quickly pointed a gun at him. As a result, a fight between John and Hatcher's men ensued. After successfully defeating Hatcher's men, John deliberately keeps Lambert alive and then asks him why Hatcher killed Daniel. Lambert then told John to ask Sandra about it because it turned out that Sandra and Keith were involved in Daniel's murder case. After taking some money and files from the room, John burned down the building and left. Elsewhere, Lucy had managed to gather all the information about John. She explained that he was one of the former Special Forces personnel who had disappeared 3 years ago for no apparent reason. Before John disappeared from the military unit, he had been assigned to Mason on a mission. Hearing this, Hatcher realized that everything John had done so far was for the sake of taking revenge for Daniel's death. That means John did not carry out all his actions based on orders from the military. Shortly after, Hatcher got a message from one of his men named Stockwell that the building where they were producing drugs had been burned down by John. Marshall, feeling very angry, immediately rushed to catch John, but Hatcher restrained him and asked him not to act rashly. Hatcher was sure that John would come to them so they wouldn't have to look for him in a moment. Meanwhile, John, who had arrived at Keith's house, threatened Keith with a gun to tell him what had really happened to Daniel. A frightened Keith says that Daniel knows a secret about a deal between Hatcher and a Dutch drug cartel. Daniel then reports Hatcher's actions to the military commander. However, Hatcher, who feels threatened, kills Daniel immediately. Keith deliberately leaks Daniel's plans to Hatcher in the hopes that he will get supplies of drugs and a job from Hatcher. After knowing this, John immediately disappeared from Keith's presence. When John was about to release Sandra from the car's trunk, he was suddenly startled by the gunshots fired by Stockwell. John, who was not carrying any weapons, decided to run away from him. The chase between John and Stockwell ensued. During the chase, Stockwell accidentally encounters Rose and immediately takes her hostage. Fortunately, John managed to release Stockwell's weapon and fought back Stockwell. The fight between John and Stockwell was fierce, but John managed to beat him with help from Rose. Shortly after that, the police came to the location, and the mysterious man who had followed John at the funeral a few days ago appeared. John then told him not to interfere in his current affairs and continue their business later. Inside his hiding place, John tells Sandra that he will forgive her if she tells him the address where Hatcher lives. After receiving information about the address, John immediately came to the location with all the weapons prepared. Hatcher had added security around his house because he knew John would be after him. But John, without the slightest fear, immediately killed all of Hatcher's men one by one. Marshall arrogantly threw his gun during the shootout and asked John to do a one-on-one duel. The fight between Marshall and John was quite fierce, but finally, John managed to kill him with his extraordinary fighting ability. Meanwhile, Sandra, who was waiting outside the Hatcher residence, was approached by a mysterious man who had met John. He then invited her to enter Hatcher's house. On the other hand, John, who had managed to kill all of Hatcher's men, immediately went to the room where Hatcher was. Hatcher asks John to do a one-on-one duel without using a weapon. John accepted the offer and placed the knife on Hatcher's desk. A fight between John and Hatcher finally ensued. In this fight, John almost died because Hatcher cheated by using iron gloves and a rope. Fortunately, the mysterious man suddenly appeared and shot Hatcher to death. The next day, at Daniel's funeral, A mysterious man who turns out to be Frost comes to John. Frost is a special forces agent sent by the military commander to bring John back to join the military unit. He gave John time to cool off by taking a few days off, but without Frost knowing it, John had disappeared from behind him. Meanwhile, Rose, who had just returned from Daniel's funeral, was surprised by a bag containing some money from John. He left a note on a piece of paper telling her to go to a better and safer place. The film closes with a scene where John leaves the city of devotion with Sandra. The moral that can be learned from this movie is that justice will come in any way, including the karma from the murders committed by criminals against innocent people.